How's it going? And welcome back to Behind the Tab, a podcast dedicated to pulling back the curtain on operations and getting a bit in the weeds on where we started, where we are, and where we're going. Each episode focuses on hospitality operators, technology partners, and GoTab's own team members who are redefining what it means to serve and scale in modern food and beverage operations. Produced by GoTab, the premier entertainment commerce platform, helping concepts of all sizes adapt and grow to an ever-changing hospitality landscape, we bring on guests that play in the same sandbox. Today's episode will dive into entrepreneurship, adaptation, expansion, lessons learned, and an overall impact your business can have on others, and what that can mean for you as an owner or operator and to those that you serve. I am Adam Howe, Director of Product Enablement at GoTab, and I will be your host for today's episode. I have spent the majority of my career working in both the brewery and entertainment industry as an operator of multiple concepts and locations from the Northeast, San Francisco Bay Area, and the Midwest. So I'm extremely excited to talk shop with our two guests today who play directly in those areas and are no strangers to working in very different markets, both in the U.S. and internationally. Pulkit Agrawal is the CEO and founder of the Fifth Ingredient, makers of the Beer30 brewery management software. He just celebrated the company's 8th year helping the brewing industry do things that they do best. Alongside Pulkit, we have Tim McLaughlin, CEO and co-founder of GoTab, and Tim is no stranger to the brewing and hospitality industry himself. 2015, he and his wife Jen opened Caboose Brewing Company in Vienna, Virginia, and they have 2 locations with that brand as well. So Pulkit, Tim, thanks for joining. How we doing?
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Doing great. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. Well, we always like to start the show with like an origin story. And Pulkit, I'm gonna put this on you because you just announced your 8th year with the Fifth Ingredient's 8th year, and there's always a reason for the origin story, right? We're talking superheroes and stuff like that. There's always like a reason. There's a superhero is usually finds themselves with their powers on accident. Some find their way because it was all planned, and there's some kind of need that they are fulfilling. So after 8 years of doing what you're doing with the Fifth Ingredient, you're still going strong and currently recording from us 15 hours or so away from Australia. And we'll talk a lot about that later on in the show. But talk to me a little bit about why, like why you find yourself here in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is that I studied mechanical engineering at Harvard University and then was recruited to work as a process engineer at Ballast Point Brewing. Mm-hmm. So at Ballast Point, that's really how I got my foot in the door when it came to the brewing side. And I wasn't really at that point focused that much on beer. As a mechanical engineer, my focus was on packaging and really focusing on their packaging equipment of high-speed bottling, canning, and kegging.
Got it.
And so that became really how I was interested in more about the actual production side. And when it came to the efficiencies, when it came to the actual manufacturing process. I helped them out in San Diego with their bottling, canning, kegging lines, and then expansion to Virginia as well. And also spearheaded the nitrogen beer program as well at Ballast Point. After I left, I really wanted to just travel and consult for breweries. And so the idea of the Fifth Ingredient, water, malt, hops, yeast, Fifth Ingredient being data, how can we help breweries use their data to actually help do something more efficiently? And so it was during that time I was actually traveling internationally, visiting friends in Canada and other places, that I realized that so many of these breweries were still on paper logs, whiteboards, or spreadsheets, while still having other brewery management software systems. And to me, that didn't make much sense, given how if you have a centralized system, it really should be focused on the production side as well. But most of these incumbents were really focused on the accounting side. And so that's where the idea of Beer30 was really born, with the idea of what can we do on the actual production side and make a software system that's very much production focused first, and then using that information to then drive distribution and accounting. And so we're now in a spot where Beer30 is now used in 450 breweries across 25 plus countries. US is our number 1 market, followed by Australia, and then multiple other countries as well. So it's really cool to kind of see over the last 8 years just how the system has evolved as the industry changes as well as we get into other markets. So just super interesting to see just what the origin story of the Fifth Ingredient is, to say it out loud.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like you fit in the mold of filling a need, right? And like you obviously you walked the walk behind the scenes for so long, and then realizing not only can you impart your knowledge that you through like a consultative approach, but also really adapt what what should be done and data that should be used in order to kind of drive things further along. That's great. I mean, I've been working before joining GoTab. I worked for 4 different brewery brands, and admittedly did not spend more than about 3 days in the brewery. I worked on the hospitality side and the brew pub side, but the very first brewery I worked at had very large, glass windows. You could see the brew deck, 4 stages. You could see all the kettles, everything. It was great. But I always felt like I missed an opportunity to get my hands dirty beyond I did a stage, like I did a 2 or 3 day stage, and that was about it. So I can appreciate the toils that you spent behind the scenes and being able to use that. On the other side, Tim, I mean, you ultimately opening up Caboose with Jen, you did everything. You're involved in every aspect of it. And ultimately, Caboose is where GoTab was born and raised, if you will, in the early goings. Started that about 10 years back, and GoTab has become a very different offering throughout the years. I mean, I've been with the company for a little over 2 years, and it's a different beast than it was just 2 years ago. Never mind 10 years ago. So, what has kind of driven the changes and the adaptations of GoTab in not only the brewing industry but the hospitality entertainment industry that we find ourselves in today?
Sure. I actually didn't realize that Pulkit and I had in common, or maybe I forgot. We're both mechanical engineers. So I was a mechanical engineer as well. And I guess we had that problem where we see a problem, we can't help but put our hands in it. So yeah, it GoTab, I mean, we started very different. We started as a QR system, really scratching a niche around just ordering another beer without standing in line, and realized this was all the way back in 2018. So we've changed a whole lot because QRs are now less than 10% of our orders. Interestingly, that's not true in Australia. Australia uses QRs quite heavily, and it's a very different market from the United States. But it has continued to evolve. One of the core things that sort of formed GoTab is the environment we grew up in. So believe it or not, we actually did QR ordering for Ballast Point all the way back in COVID. And the challenge at the time was we couldn't integrate with the system. So they were on, at the time, Aloha. I'll use them as an example because Aloha is virtually impossible to integrate with. And I came from an enterprise software world where everybody integrated all their data. So going back to Pulkit's point on data, it's really hard to operate a business without data. And coming out, I started previous to owning a brewery, I started the enterprise software world and worked in all kinds of stuff with, big banks and big retail and a lot of large publicly traded companies. And it never occurred to me that businesses wouldn't have their data. It wasn't until I got into restaurants or breweries or SMB, and I realized that no one even knew that they had data, nor where it was, or how to get it, or how to use it. And so one of the key things that sort of formed GoTab, because we were blocked out of the POS integration when we were the QR sort of appendage, if you will, the POSs wouldn't let us integrate. So Aloha wouldn't let us integrate. And so we ended up having to build a POS, and as a result of that form, I guess, being blocked out, if you will, of the data and being blocked out of the ability to create what we thought was a better experience for the guest and allow the operator the versatility to leverage that data. We turned around, and when we did become the POS, we actually left our doors open and said, hey, come one, come all, everybody, you should integrate, because ultimately our view is if the operators win, we win. Even if that means, hey, they may use a product that takes some of our would-be revenue, right? And so you see this in the POS world. Everybody in the POS world is like, oh, I got to get a piece of it. And the company, I won't say their name, after that you came from, they actually charge integration fees, which is really, to me, is kind of weird, because it's like, well, why are you charging fees to integrate? I mean, I get it. Maybe if you're taking, like, if you can't if like our business can't stay in business because somehow there is no way for us to make money. But that's not typical. That's not typical outside the hospitality world. And so I'd say, going back to your question, is partnerships and integrations at GoTab is sort of fundamental to our business. I'd say we're one of the leaders in the space around integrations. We're over 200 integrations at this point. For a company our size, that's a lot. More than much bigger companies. Right. And so we're really proud of that. That is very much in our DNA. And even we acquired a recipe management, not beer, but food recipe management company last year. And we still integrate with 5 other, recipe and costing systems, because the one we have might not fit everybody. And so our belief is it's their data, and we try to integrate and keep the doors open so our operators have a better outcome.
Yeah, the idea of using a best of breed solution in general is definitely one of the things that drew me to joining GoTab in the first place. And Pulkit, I mean, we have a great relationship with the Beer30 software and through the Fifth Ingredient as well. So, I mean, for me, just being able to attach myself to not only one single brewery that I might be working with, but now hundreds of breweries through different partnerships that we've been able to create, that has to have been a big portion of you moving into that consultative role with the Fifth Ingredient. You're not, I wouldn't say stuck's not the right word, but like, you're not stuck with just dealing with one brewery, even though you have the ability to expand into Virginia, into different markets just with one brand. You're still just one brand, right? And now with going into the Fifth Ingredient and creating the Fifth Ingredient, you have an opportunity, I suspect, or you had an opportunity to make your mark and assist in the success of hundreds of breweries, at this point. That's got to feel really good. That kind of leads us into kind of the big thing you mentioned. The U.S. is your number one market, but Australia is getting to be a close second. How long have you been operating in the Australian market?
Yeah, so we actually had our first brewery in Australia sign up in April 2019.
Okay.
So we've been in the market for a bit. I was actually here in Brisbane. I'm actually going to go visit them this afternoon. Aether Brewing was our first brewery. They took a chance on us. And so, yeah, Australia at this point, 1 in 6 breweries in Australia is using Beer30. And so it's been really cool to just come into town, right now I'm actually in Australia for the Bintani Innovation Roadshow. So we're actually hitting up 5 different cities. Started off in Sydney, now we're in Brisbane, Melbourne on Friday, Adelaide on Monday, and Perth on Wednesday. And just really focused in on hitting up so many of our current customers, but also prospects, people that are using different software systems. And Australia is just such an interesting market and a lot of fun to be in.
So that's the question though. It's like, what made it so interesting that you got in there in 2019? You've been there for just about, you're going on to your 6th or 7th year. Yeah. If I can do math is fun. And so what drew you there, and what has made that market in particular so successful for you that you've been there almost as long as you've been a company?
Yeah, I think the biggest aspect here in the Australia side is that it was at that pretty much the rising spot where the US was maybe 10, 12 years ago. And so because of that, it led to a position where we were able to become one of the adopters in the market that was actually very innovative when it comes to the data side. But also the other big aspect was our customer support aspect. So being in California at the time and being able as a founder, able to do founder-led sales, but also do founder-led customer support, really led to a position where we were able to really service the Australian market during their business hours. And because of that, it led to a lot more of that camaraderie aspect and actually having so much early adopter feedback, because most of these breweries were coming on where we'd just been around for about 1.5 years. And so we were on like version 2 of the system and really understanding and working with them. And I think that was the key difference with the US versus Australia, where when we entered Australia, for example, we had no accounting integration. And at that point, talking to a number of these breweries, they're like, well, we love what you're doing on the production side. would you integrate with Xero, Xero? And this is one of those where so many in the US, other brewery management systems were integrating with QuickBooks. And we're like, well, let's not chase the rabbit. Let's go do something different. And so that allowed us to be one of the first to market when it came to integrating brewery management with Xero. And so many of the breweries here actually helped us when it came to building out that integration, getting on with them and actually understanding how they do their finances, understanding the GST side of things here in Australia, and even working with them to build out, for example, a 2-click Australian excise tax report. And that was something that no other system was doing. And excise tax on a monthly or quarterly basis is taking them anywhere from like a day, 2 days to get done. And our big value prop at that point was it's a 2-click return. Just pick the start date, end date, and we do all the math for you. Mm-hmm. And so it's things like that where the market was just so ripe and eager for having a system come in that could actually help streamline their production processes and actually get into a position of using their data to do something better, and making those data-driven insights.
Yeah, I think just your willingness to adapt as well kind of makes a big deal. We talk about this a lot internally, Tim, of course, at GoTab, just the willingness to adapt to the service model, to the customer base, to the operation. We're moving, GoTab, for anybody who's not aware, is newer to the Australian market, but we've seen a lot of early on success across a variety of operators and operations. What have you kind of noticed firsthand as far as like the impact that GoTab is having or can have on operations in that market that were different than as we started growing GoTab in the US?
It is very different, right? It's funny because I was talking to an operator who's going the opposite way 4 years ago. They were trying to come into the US market from Australia. And the POS world is complicated, to say the least. In some cases, we may have 3 or 4 tax layers, right? State, county, city, whatever random meals tax they come up with. There's a new crazy tax in my county that makes 0 sense and no system can manage. So, it's complicated. And then Australia, has its own set of rules, and try to go to Canada and then you step into Quebec and everything changes again. So it is easy to underestimate the differences. I would say one of the reasons why we pursued Australia, and actually we probably went later than we should have, is because they do heavily leverage QR. And it is still a very popular technology there due to a number of reasons. And that's obviously very much in our DNA. I mean, that's how we started. So we are POS now, and in the US, there's lots and lots and lots of our customers that probably don't even know we have a QR system. You might know better than I do, Adam, but the reality is they're using us like an old school POS. And so, but in Australia, that's a very relevant technology, and a lot of US-based POSs, actually no US-based POS integrates QR like we do. So in a country where that's valued, it's a very, great asset to have. So their tax code's actually way simpler. It's different, but it is simpler because you don't have all kinds of stacked taxes. But there's differences that matched our tech. And I'm sure we could go to other markets where we would find out it doesn't, right? Sure. For any arbitrary reason. But that is one, we went there because we were told multiple times we should be in Australia. And I finally made the trip. Found, of course, I loved it. Much like Pulkit said, it's a great place. And, shortly thereafter signed our first contract, hired our first team. Now we're up to 4 people there now. We're hiring in Australia, which is great. And it's an exciting market for us.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Pulkit was one of the ones telling us that we needed to be in Australia. So that was preordained, if you will. Pulkit, you said something earlier. Actually, Tim really talked about integration partners and best of breed and partnerships in general like that. But Pulkit talked about, since you were in Australia so early on in your operations, lifespan, it seems as though the operators had just as much impact on the fifth ingredient or the beer or in your products as your products could have on the operation. Would you would you say that's true? Like, how much impact do your operators have on how you adapt and evolve your products in comparison to how much use case your products can have on a new market or new operations?
Yeah, I think just so we're clear, operators meaning customers, right? And so at
Yes.
the end of the day, the customer is the one that's in charge of what's happening. There's obviously aspects of crowdsourcing as much as possible from multiple breweries. I think that was one of the biggest things where we quickly realized that if we just built Beer30 out for Australia based on the aspects of one brewery, that may not apply for other breweries of different sizes. And so doing a lot of those customer product interviews to start off with, and really understanding what they need when it comes to the actual production side to then have that impact our roadmap and actually implement the way that we're implementing the actual Beer30 side. And so I think that's where the actual customer operator interviews become so critical and becomes an element where we weren't really focused on getting it perfect out of the gate, but getting it out there, getting immediate feedback into it, and having those iterative meetings just keep constantly improving. And so the operators and customers are the ones that actually drive our roadmap and understanding what it is that they actually need in order to make better brewing decisions.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the operating world myself as well, and Tim, I'm sure you could speak to this as well. Like, there's the adage that the customer is always right. It's not so much that the customer is actually right, it's just the customer is going to tell you what they want. And if you, as an operator, are willing to take that feedback in and take that in, and you get that in mass, you can make educated decisions about menu changes, about hours of operation, as simple as that, or just what you're offering in general. Um,
They're going to give you their pain point effectively. And then you, as
yeah.
the engineer, as the team behind it, need to really dive in on what's the true pain point. Because what they're telling you is usually a symptom of something bigger. And what you need to figure out is what's that bigger problem that you can actually fix rather than just fixing those small cuts that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where the biggest aspect, and getting more and more of those breweries and kind of aggregating that information lets you actually know what's going to happen, as opposed to just one person's feeling one way about this. And we still get this right now. I'm sure that if you look at your product backlog, we have well over 800 feature requests from people. And even just last night doing
That's it.
Are you all over that? Are you well over 800?
Oh, we're in thousands. You know what? No one anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at some point it just goes into that like abyss that's there, and that's just the way it works. And everybody has a feature request or something that they would wish was better, and it becomes you as the owners, as the product team, engineering team, customer experience team, even the sales team, that all have to work together to figure out what it is that you actually want to add that's part of your product mentality and product vision.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and then I think you stated it well. I don't need to restate it, but I do think there's always, describe your problem, describe what you maybe think is the answer, and then I have to, we as product people have to go reconcile that with the 800 other descriptions of the same problem with 800 different sets of words. And then where's the underlying symptom? What in fact is it? Is it an approach? Is it terminology? Is it a structure? What is leading to these symptoms? Which is the hard part, because you don't always get it right. I don't always get it right. I'm sure you guys don't always get it right, and you have to come back and iterate. But that's where the talking to the customer comes in, right? I don't really think you can spend too much time with customers.
No, there's absolutely no way of doing that. And we're talking a lot about, like, from a product standpoint, software, hardware, what have you, but this really does translate into the hospitality, entertainment industries, because you're going to get every customer that walks in and be like, you shouldn't have fries on the side of the sandwich. You should do salads, or you should have breaded wings. You should have, or breadless wings, or smoked wings. I understand you would like that. If I can get enough data to collect from multiple voices, and I realize, hey, I can make an actual change here to solve a problem that is actually happening, then we'll move forward with that. But if a restaurateur made a change every single time somebody asked them to, they'd be out of business in about a week. So, or they just pull out all their hair. Either way.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
You're gonna make decisions on a single voice sometime, and it's going to end up being the wrong decision. You're going to have failures as much as you're going to have successes. So that leads me to this final question for both of you guys. Ultimately, you guys have been around, like I said, the better part of the last decade. And you've been in Pulkit and like all around the world. You literally, physically, right now, you're all around the world. But you got here not by being successful every single day. Like there were, I'll use the term failures. It could be called lessons. You've learned, you've made list, and those are more powerful than your success stories in general. Because usually when you're successful, you just bask in it, right? And you try to repeat it every single time, but it doesn't. You can't always repeat it because everything is different the next day. So you learn more from your failures and your lessons than your success stories. So I'm going to ask you to share your biggest learning experience or learning opportunity with the fifth ingredient that you've endured, and what impact the results of that lesson have had on the direction of your company. It could have happened yesterday. It could have happened when you first started the business.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think I'll split it up into two aspects. I think one being me as an individual and a founder and CEO that I think can actually impact more people listening to this from a leadership perspective, and then more from like the business product company side. I think that's a different type of lesson. So on my end, I think the biggest aspect over the last 8 years as a founder and CEO has been really focused in on the leadership side to empower the team members around me, and actually learning about how to build a true leadership team and actually having them make their own decisions. And this is still a process that I still don't get it right all the time. I don't think any of us as CEOs ever get it fully right. But it's one of those that's a constant learning process. And so for that, the biggest piece that I actually learned was when we were going through our first hiring. Again, this is something where we had contractors that we worked with for a number of years. And then it was actually less than 5 years ago where we had our first full-time employee. And so being in a position to say like, all right, cool, what does that actually look like? And how do we actually build a team with that? It got to a point of actually hiring an executive coach to help me out when it came to learning more about how to best get what I need from my own learnings and from the ones around me. So there's two really good executive coaches that we still work with, and actually have one that's impacting us on a regular basis, Melissa Eisler from San Diego and Hakeem Lockdown in Fort Lauderdale. And it's really good working with both of them to get that leadership component into getting the best out of your team. And I think that was for me a really big learning lesson on the individual side, because that has led me to actually be in a position where I can do a roadshow like this and know that my team can still handle sales, marketing, customer experience, product updates are still going out, and engineering decisions are being made. So I think that's from like the individual level. And that was me really taking that step back and learning what type of collaborative leader I want to be. And I think anybody listening to this should really evaluate what their leadership team is thinking about it. And if they need to do a 360, if they need to actually get that raw feedback, because when you have a third party person talk to your direct reports and really get the ins and outs of what they're experiencing, it helps you become a better leader, because you're able to see your pain points, your weaknesses, your shadows, along with your strengths. Just like you said, we all know what our strengths are and how quickly we can adapt to problems. It's really those weaknesses or shadows that we need to really focus on working on so that we can continuously be better. So I think that would be on the individual side in terms of like one of the big lessons. And I'll have Tim do his individual stuff first before we get into the company side.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm 49. I've made a lot of mistakes, so many that I can't remember many of them. I would say similar to Pulkit, they have impacted me a lot. And some of the biggest learnings for me is as an engineer as well. I used to always think everything was solvable with technology. And I would say there's a number of books I've read, but I've learned, the hard way that in many cases, there's always an emotional problem before there's a technical solution. And so I try to understand now, what is the emotional problem we're talking about, or maybe we're not talking about, that's sitting in front of the so there's two problems, and I need to make sure I'm taking care of the emotional one, because you'll never get to the technical one if you don't address or think about, or at least, be aware of the emotion part. first. That took a long ass time to learn as an engineer, right? It's something that doesn't naturally come to me. And it was through, combinations of, books and peers and coaches and such to inform me about it. But it's been probably some of the most valuable things I've learned. I mean, I've been always quite good on the tech side, and that hasn't always served me the best. So echoing your same view, I'd say the specifics of that include my management team. I'm actually, somewhat strangely, my management team at GoTab is actually three of the same management team from SiteWorks. And I'm pretty sure they would have killed me in the first 5 years. And happily, in the last 5 years at SiteWorks, they were, great, incredible contributors, so much so that they managed to come with me, 10 years later to start the next company. So in my mind, that was a huge success that I grew into through a lot of hard knocks. And I couldn't agree more, Adam. Actually, I find it funny when people say, "Oh, I'm going to invest in this CEO. He's hit it out of the park 2 times in a row, 2 years in." And I'm like, good effing luck with that, because the guy who's done it right 2 times in a row probably is going to get his ass handed to him at the next one, because the fact is the market doesn't always smile on you and things happen. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And the unlucky part is when you really learn.
The thing you said about the fact that you were able to bring your management team with you from one company to the other is something I lived through as moving from operating and director of retail at different companies. I was able to do that in a nice way without having to actually, steal them from the old company. I got lucky. My former brewery actually closed, and I knew that ahead of time. So I was able to actually, hey, you should probably come join me here as well. And I was able to, yeah, and they followed me for that same reason. And it's because they saw the growth that I in my first management job, they saw the growth from day one to day, 1,000, and what a difference that time made in that relationship you're able to build. So I think that's a big learning aspect that can really make any management team successful, no matter where you end up moving into. Pulkit, from like a more broader standpoint than from a company standpoint, you had an additional failure. I love talking about failures, so you might as well.
Yeah, I think the piece there is really the market's constantly changing, and you have to be willing to adapt with it. Like, we have spent so much time in the past building out our own keg tracking, for example, with the whole like, okay, these are going to have numbers. It's going to be great because that's what the customer wanted 7 years ago. And then as we started implementing it, it was one of the lowest modules that we were getting as an adoption rate, right? And it was one of those that it was like we hadn't done enough research. Maybe the interface wasn't great. Maybe understanding the business use case wasn't as practical as it is in present day. And so we actually end of life that a few years ago, right? And we spent so much time and energy building that out. And there's been other modules and initiatives we've taken that when you look back, you're like, wow, we spent countless hundreds, thousands of hours, thousands of dollars on building something out that you just have to end of life just because you can't support it. But what that ties in with is actually focusing in on those areas that customers are really excited by. And in this industry right now, especially with where the growth trends have really started to slow down with the US, Australia, understanding what it is, like, for example, Asia is more of an up and coming market for us, and seeing how we can get into more breweries there. And understanding at the same time that in each of these markets, just like Tim was talking about earlier, the pieces of software do need to change as well. And from that adaptability side, as we continuously grow, there are going to be other competitors that enter the landscape, right? And so now when I started this business, there were only 3 other software systems that were focused on brewery inventory management. We're now up to 18 softwares in this industry, right? And that can be so overwhelming when you're shopping around for brewery management. And obviously Beer30, I can arguably say, is the best in the production side of the business, and actually focused more on that production side, and still does everything else on distribution, accounting, etc. But the focus really is on understanding what the market needs, finding partners like yourselves at GoTab that we're never going to build up POS, but let's integrate with other best-in-class software systems and build that ecosystem. And it's going to change, and you need to adapt as time continues on, as breweries shut down, as it gets more competitive. And that whole profitability equation becomes so much more critical for them to stay in business. And so being able to take the wins, but also learn from those losses and understand what it is that you could have done differently from a product side, from a customer side, in order to actually keep growing.
Yeah, I think the fact that you were willing to do like send something you made, you built, you put time and effort into out to pasture. I think a lot of people have the idea of like the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, well, we put all this time into it, we have to make it work. And if it's just not, you recognize that, you learn that lesson and move on. You can spend that time and energy on something that's going to be a little bit more, hopefully useful. Tim, from a company standpoint, we'll close it out here.
I'll start with the simple one. So GoTab is funny because we only exist, and I hate to admit this, we only exist thanks to the lucky break that was very unlucky for the world, which was COVID. So we were doing QRs in 2018. Crazy effing idea. We had some breweries that were interested because breweries were hot. They had lines. No one wanted to stand in line. So we actually had some breweries. We rolled out my brewery. We had lines. People would avoid the line. But my lesson, then this is a lesson I continue to learn, is old habits die hard, right? Like getting people to change is tough. Like, and I always underestimate how much people don't want to change. And so we essentially got lucky when COVID hit because we were struggling to find product market fit. We solved a very niche problem, which was in breweries, high volume breweries in particular. But that's not a big enough business, for what we were doing. And somewhat, tragically, comically, luckily, COVID hit. We took off like a rocket ship for 2 years. But at the end of the 2 years, we could already see it coming. Everybody's like, to hell with this stuff. I don't want anything related to COVID. And QRs remind me of COVID. At least that was the sentiment in the US. So we had to pivot. We did see it coming. So we didn't make the mistake per se because we didn't really have any choice and we became a POS. But I would say that, arguably the mistake that we did make is that we maybe thought that QRs would hang on a little longer or they would have more impact. And then we tried to sort of manage the costs around hardware because we thought operators would not want to spend money on hardware. Turns out a lot of them actually did, strangely. And so there were multiple. I mean, like I said, we accrued plenty of mistakes. We continue to learn from them. We continue to reinvest. But yeah, I would say we even got lucky in that very onset, but yet then we, made dumb mistakes right thereafter. So it's a continuing stream of lucky breaks and mistakes, piling on, I guess.
I mean, that's where all the success stories end up starting off with, like a domino effect of combination of luck and falling down to mistakes and then putting them back up and knocking them all down again. Well, this has been great. Thank you guys so much for the time and energy. Your day is just beginning, Pulkit, out there in Brisbane. I mean, I don't know about Tim. I don't know your night is looking like, but mine is coming down to the end of the day. So with that note, we're going to let you, Pulkit, get to it. Enjoy the rest of your time in Australia. Is Brisbane your last stop, or you're going into a different market?
Stop number 2. There's 3 more cities that we're doing the roadshow in.
Oh man. Are you going to another market after Australia, or are you coming back home?
No, I'll be back in the States for a bit and then go from there into whatever 2026 travels look like, TBA.
Yeah. All right. Well, with all of that and everything else that we've talked about, again, thank you so much for listening and playing along with us on the Behind the Tab podcast produced by GoTab. And we'll check you back again next time.